you're left sort of in a lurch. So what we try to do in those instances is we try to impact the least amount of students. And that's really the best answer I can give you. We do have with our alternative schools, because sometimes attendance can be an issue and tardiness can be an issue, those schools have TARC protocols in place. And again, that doesn't fall back as our reasoning for that, but that is that's just sort of a look into the decisions are made. Something that I do want to mention, because Mr. Hudson alluded to it, during the summer, I sat in front of you and sort of previewed sort of where we were at, and we talked about a third bell time for the two discipline alternative schools as well as the TAP program. We've ran the numbers and ran them again this morning. We would not have dropped a single route this year if we had shifted to that bell time. Now, I'm not saying into the future, if attendance spikes, everything that we're doing, we need to do and probably more. And then definitely, it's not going to be the last time you hear me say this, and probably Mr. Hudson as well along with me, we need to make some really preventative changes for next school year so we can insulate ourselves from this, because like I said, we can trend bus driver attendance and employee attendance overall. I know from my time in human resources, to where we can predict what these days are going to look like, sometimes to the day that we're going to have high absenteeism. So we do need to reduce the number of routes we have going at any one time, and that does also create a cost savings, because it also means that you need less buses in your fleet and less drivers overall.
Ms. Horn.
I guess I'll direct this to Dr. Hargens. When we're faced with a decision of different bell times, and we've heard this since, the spring from HR, that there would be a shortage in bus drivers from Dr. Razor's department, this operational and managerial leadership, why are we in this position now? What do you propose? Is there anything we can do? I am hearing from the TAP school. These are pregnant teenagers and their children, and they don't have transportation. They're our most vulnerable. It's a award-winning, nationally recognized dropout prevention program, and this is unacceptable to me.
And it's unacceptable to me as well. So Dr. Razor and his team, and they outlined a collaborative 8-point plan that we have worked to make sure that we don't leave any child without transportation. So I think Dr. Razor has said, and every time Dr. Razor texts me, I said, what else can we try? And we keep trying everything. So we'll continue to explore everything. And Mr. Hudson talked about the 8-point plan. I guess it now has 8 points. It started with 4. I'm directly involved in monitoring the plan with them to make sure that we do all the plans and we adjust accordingly. So it is not by any stretch a lack of effort or a lack of really great thinking by the transportation team.
Mr. Hadaway.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Hearing from some constituents, when a bus route has dropped, and how are we communicating to those parents so that their students that are sitting on the side waiting for their bus, that their parents know to come get them or whatever? What communication channels we have if that happens?
We are notifying the schools as soon as possible. Our guidance to them, and again, sometimes it's a rolling notification.
Sure.
Because it's our goal, and it's what happened, and we explained with Miss Porter. It's our goal every day to cover every one of our routes. And what happened with the Foster route that morning was we simply ran out of time, and they looked up, and it was 10 minutes after the bus should have already been on its way. and they hadn't gotten it covered yet. So what we're communicating to schools is as soon as we realize that that route's not going to be covered, we communicate to them, say it's going to be bus this, and then the school will start communicating with those families as soon as possible. Sadly, we're getting better at being able to tell when we're not going to get them covered unless we have a last minute no call, no show, and our notification is getting a little better, but it's not, like I said, all at once we realize here's the 5 routes we're not covering today. It's, oh, that one's not going to work, and then 5 minutes later that one isn't, and that's happening at 13 separate bus compounds. The question's been asked to us too. I'm going to ask what a potential follow-up question be is, can you go back and get those kids later? From the middle high school routes, we're short because you heard me say we have 893 routes at the middle high level, then only 873 at the elementary. So the conventional wisdom would be that means there's 20 routes out there and 20 buses out there. Those people aren't at work because they don't exist because we're covering those routes already. So on the middle high, we don't really have the opportunity to circle back. The way that we're preventing dropping elementary routes into the future, it was a contingency we didn't think we were going to have to worry about. But the way we're preventing that is if it looks apparent that we potentially might not have enough people to cover elementary routes, we're with a lot of foresight, because we have a little more time there to make that call, we will call XYZ Elementary and say, we're going to start notifying your families. You start notifying your families. Bus 1237 is going to be running 35 minutes late this morning. Or there's going to be another bus that's coming through 45 minutes later to get those children. We're working with schools, and it doesn't always work out because the person who drives their activity bus may or may not be there. But on a case-by-case basis, as Dr. Hargan said, we're turning over every stone. So if there is somebody at that school who hasn't volunteered to be a bus driver but drives the team to the games on Friday nights, is willing to go cover that route, we're doing that as well.
Mr. Brady, and then we're going to call for the vote on this one, please.
A few questions. First of all, what is our legal responsibility for transporting students?
Frank, do you want to speak to that?
The statute says that a school district shall provide transportation for students who live a certain distance from school.
Okay,
It
so it's a
says
shall. Okay. So that's something to take into consideration here. You know, I know that you've been speaking to this issue for a while. Obviously, we'd love to go back in time, excuse me, to address this issue, but we can't. So I'm curious as to why it took so long for us to kind of get to this point. I know you had been suggesting this back in the summer, and I don't know why we didn't have an alternative bell schedule, but I guess we'll wait for that answer at a different time. Some of the other concerns I'm having is that I understand that, you know, we have alternative school buses to carry alternative school students, ideally alternative school students directly to those schools. My understanding is that these alternative school students are now riding buses with general, just with non-alternative school students, and that's something that we ideally want to prevent. Is that correct?
Typically, we run direct run buses on our alternative schools. So Minor Daniels Academy and Breckenridge Metro, we typically in the past have ran direct run buses. In order to ensure those students getting to school, some of our Minor Daniels buses and some of our Breckenridge Metro buses are running through the depots on the way in the morning to assure that those students are able to get to school.
And I know that those buses are ideally, because the board approved it, to have bus monitors on there. Are we having a shortage of bus monitors as well?
We are attempting to put a bus monitor on every bus that schools are asking for, including, again, teachers as well. So any school that is requesting a bus monitor that has someone to cover it, yes. Having said that, there are some buses where people probably haven't volunteered to be a bus monitor.
Okay. So there's that issue. And regarding, I guess from an HR perspective, We had talked about the other salary levels or pay levels for school bus drivers in other surrounding districts.
Yes.
My concern is that that might not be our target audience. And the reason I say this is because we are in Louisville, Kentucky. We're very distribution heavy, and there's a lot of competition for a lot of CDL drivers out here. Are we really looking at the correct market to be able to attract drivers that can actually operate our school buses just by looking at the, the other school districts? And I'm concerned about, folks like, the freight services or UPS or, I guess even TARC services or whatnot. I mean, I'm not really sure if we're looking at, if just by looking at other school districts around here, and especially with the holidays coming up, are we really going to be competitive to trying to attract drivers to be able to fill this critical need?
I guess there are a couple of answers, and I don't have a good answer for you. Let me just say that. I mean, and that's part of the
Excuse me,
speculation.
before you give that answer, there's some more information that Dr. Razor has, but in the interest of time, if you all could put something together that would come to us in the Friday update, go on and answer the question now. But when I met with you, you talked about TARC, you talked about UPS, you talked about a number of things that have been done. So rather than to do a full-blown report on bus transportation at this time, if you would answer Mr. Brady's questions, I would appreciate it, and then we will call for the vote and move to the next item. So if you would answer Mr. Brady's questions, please.
I'll turn it over to Mike to give you the TARC data that he reviewed with you, so it's the same for everybody.
Are you referring to TARC and their drivers, or right now
I'm referring to more than just TARC, like UPS and the entire market.
Yeah, well, TARC is right now offering unlimited overtime to their drivers. So it is very attractive to be a TARC driver, even though you start at a lower rate than we pay. But again, with TARC, there is no escrow. So you're getting that full amount right off the bat. UPS right now is actually, when we proposed the $100 a week bonus, we modeled that off UPS. By the time we 5 days later had a meeting finally that we could all get together on, and that's not a very long amount of time, so I'm not saying it was 5 days. It had bumped up to 200. So now, again, working for UPS, you're working 10 to 20 hours a week, making $10 an hour, but you're roughly doubling your salary again, no escrow. So that is going on there. We have also worked, I wasn't sure where Ms. Porter was going with this. We've met twice now with TARC looking for alternatives around ways of getting kids to school. Because I was just in Cincinnati a few weeks ago. They use their public transportation system quite heavily for a lot of their schools. Boston uses their public transportation system quite heavily for a number of their schools. I know Philadelphia, Chair Jones actually was in Philadelphia several weeks ago and sent an email saying, I'm noticing lots of kids getting on and off. The TARC system, I'm glad we're working with them, and we're working in concert with them on our master plans. Even, as I told you, from the facility side, I've got people from Metro government working on the district facilities plan. They've got me helping to work on the comprehensive city plan. But what TARC shared with me is the TARC lines haven't changed since, I believe, 1955 when the trolleys went away. So we have, I think, 40 routes that TARC follows that doesn't get kids necessarily where we need them to use them as a transportation alternative for say, secondary schools or some of our voluntary and mandatory alternative programs.
Okay.
The one other thing that I would like to add quickly is the decisions that we're making about financial rates and those sorts of things. If this is a shorter term thing, we don't want to be going in and changing the salary structure that has a long-term effect. So if there was a proposal that we beat around in our thinking here that would take us to $23 an hour to do that. It's a $4 million hit to the budget. So it's something that we want to be careful and thoughtful about how we put in place. And not only does this have an impact on just what would go on with our bus drivers, but all the other unions as well. And we have stepping stone arguments to be made. So it's a complex problem. And the other thing I would say is it's not just here, it's a nationwide
Oh, yeah.
issue that everybody's having, so.
The other thing, and I know we didn't want this to be, the one thing I would say, and I think the reason Mr. Hudson is saying that too, if we want to look at long-term financial impact, and I don't think anyone here would disagree with me, there's a solution around this to keep this from happening, but it's going to take some forethought. It's not something we can do for Wednesday morning, tomorrow. And there may be some things we could do to start the second semester, perhaps, that would limit this, but long-term, we can fix this problem.
And you're referring to changing bell times?
Yeah, I'm referring to changing bell times, and as well as, for example, and I know lots of information, but I want you to realize that we're working this problem every day. Right now, we take kids to 56 different sites for early childhood. We could fit all of those kids in 12 early childhood centers and probably cut 200 buses out of the fleet. And not probably do it with more, provide early childhood with more efficacy than we currently do with onesie twosies all over the place. It's some of those kind of thinking, and that doesn't affect our student assignment plan at all, and makes more room in a lot of elementary schools that could actually help with some of the diversity guidelines that we've been talking about.
Okay.
Let me thank you, Dr. Razor. In the meeting that I had there, they have done a tremendous amount of work about changing the bell schedule. They mentioned doing that in January. We're not ready to do that in January because that's something that has to be communicated to our principals, to our students, to our staff. And when we first talked about moving the bell schedule or changing the bell schedule, I know at least 2 of my colleagues said people are calling saying don't do that. So when I met with Dr. Razor, I said, let's do the process in a manner so that everyone understands and that we communicate it out. So there is lots of work that has been done that we will continue to hear about. So in the process, Dr. Wilner of saying you wanted to call this down to say what a great idea it was, we've been able to answer lots of questions along the way, so thank you for that. So would you please make the motion for us to receive item B, please? You seconded? Did you make the motion? So yes. Okay, is there a second? Ms. Horn, all